Thank you to the Williamsville Library for asking me to present for Earth Day this year. Unfortunately, I'm not able to present this live due to the pandemic, but I wanted to make a video just with some of my thoughts for those of us who garden, on what we can do to help the earth out a little bit this Earth Day in our own backyards. So I'm going to start with some bad news, which probably won't surprise anyone. The bad news is that we currently are seeing one of the highest extinction rates in the planet's history. So this graph compares rates of extinction that we're currently seeing in the green with what we call the background rate, which is calculated from the fossil record, which is shown in the purple. And what you can see from this figure is that the current rate of extinction is 100 to 1,000 times faster than this background rate. And unfortunately, the predictions of what the rates will be in the future, those are shown in the red here, are that these extinction rates will go even higher and we'll have even more species going extinct. Now, this loss of plants and animals isn't uniform across the globe. Some regions are more severely affected than others. Grasslands in particular are at very high risk of loss because we tend to convert grasslands to agriculture, right? Because, well, corn is a grass. So here in central Illinois, the natural ecosystem type would be tallgrass prairie. And it's actually been classified as a crisis ecoregion, and that's because so little prairie is protected and so much of it has been lost. So that's enough bad news. So what can we do about this? Well, first off, let's take a look at what we're talking about when we think about plants and animals that we share the earth with and what species we see that are going extinct. Now, a big percentage of these plants and animals on the earth are, of course, our animals, and we tend to think of our vertebrates, like our mammals and our birds, first when we think of animals. But it turns out that our animals with backbones are a very small percentage of all of the animals on earth. And in fact, 1 million or almost 1 million of the animals are insects. And so you can see that in the top blue pie chart here. So there's just so many bugs. And this is actually good news for conservation because it's easier for us to conserve a population of insects, right, in our backyard. It's easier for me to have my house support a population of fireflies, for example, than it would be to protect big vertebrates like prairie chickens. Now, I'm going to just hope that you are already an insect lover, and if you're not, well, then I'll just have to make another video. But in a nutshell, we'll just say that, yes, there are some insects that are pests, but they are just a few bad apples, and most of them should be loved and encouraged to have high populations. So where are we going to find these areas within Illinois specifically to support all of our native insect populations? Well, it turns out there's lots of places, and this includes our own backyards. So you can see on the left here this big lawn, right, when somebody has diligently mowed, because you can see the lines there. And some people enjoy doing this, but a lot of us don't. So in exchange for that lawn, or in place of that lawn, what we could do is set up a native landscaping instead. And you can kind of see a flyer for this from a Rhode Island group where they're actually encouraging people to plant native plants. And then you can not only support all of the insects and birds, as I'll talk about, but you can also then just kind of hang out in your hammock and read a book like this guy instead of having to mow every weekend. So So far I've emphasized insects, but it's important to note that it's not just our insects that you'll be supporting if you start a garden with native plants. You'll also be supporting our bird populations, because insects are actually the primary source of protein for most birds. So many people think of birds eating seeds, which many of them do, but they need those caterpillars, they need those insects. And Illinois insects can't just eat any old plant that you put out in your garden, right? It's important that they have specific plants, the plants that they've adapted to be able to eat, and these are called their host plants. And of course, the most kind of iconic example of a host plant that supports one of our beautiful insects, the monarch butterfly, is the milkweed plant, right? So the milkweed is the only plant that these baby monarchs or these caterpillars can eat. And so because of that, you need to have this particular plant in gardens or in the landscape to support monarch populations. But different butterflies and different moths and other insects have different host plants, right? So ideally, our gardens would have lots of different species of plants in them that bloomed at different times, and they would support both the caterpillar stage and the adult stage. So you can see the insect here, the monarch, drinking from that aster. And so it's important to also have these nectar plants in our gardens. And again, there's whole suites of species that we can pick from when we think about designing our gardens to support our native plants and animals, including this whole genus Liatris, which is one of my favorites. That's in part because I can do a plug for my university, right? So we're the Prairie Stars, right, at UIS, and there's actually a plant that's called the Prairie Blazing Star, and it, in terms of the monarch, is actually a wonderful nectar source for the monarchs when they're migrating back south. So it's a late season nectar source. So there's lots and lots of these plants that we can choose from. And we can create these small little ecosystems, right? And every one of these ecosystems can make a difference. So you can see here this idea that we will make these where we work, learn, and play. And this idea that we can start to create more ecosystems throughout the landscape really comes from Michael Rosenzweig's work in this field that's called reconciliation ecology. So how do we make our landscapes so that they're more hospitable to a lot of these other plants and animals? Another name that's frequently associated with this movement is Doug Tallamy, and he's actually written a whole book about it. Not surprisingly, he's an entomologist, right? So he understands the importance of putting these native plants into our gardens so that we can support our insect populations. And if you buy this book, you'll see, or get it from your library, right? You can see that there's beautiful photos in there as well of leafhoppers and all of these other beneficial insects. By taking this approach, your garden can become this small world for these little species, right? So I love this quote in this slide here. It talks about the small creatures that live their whole lives in your yard. So many small creatures can spend their whole life within the perimeters of your yard. Their lives depend on you. And then you can also see in this figure some basic tips of avoiding pesticides, again, planting native plants, and then also leaving the leaves in the fall, because it turns out leaving the leaves on your lawn or on your garden provides habitat for insects over the winter. So the insects like to hang out in the leaves during the winter. And you could also see the benefits of less yard work, right? So already we're talking about having less lawn, right? So that's less yard work. And now we're also learning that learning the leaves is a good thing. Of course, once we create the habitat for all of these beautiful creatures, we want to protect them from things that will kill them. So you do need to protect them from pesticides. And this is because pesticides aren't selective just to the pest, right? So when you use pesticides, they may control the pest, but then they also will kill the good bugs in your garden as well. So one benefit of creating a local garden ecosystem like this is that you'll actually build up a lot of species in your yard, including predators to your pests. So over time, as those predators to your pests build up in your yard, they should naturally keep your pests in check for you. And a predator would just be something like a bird flying through your yard that's going to eat those insects that are pests. Sometimes people worry about the aesthetics of these native gardens, right? Will the garden look messy? What will my neighbors think if I put in all of these native plants? And of course, really, it's up to you to pick what kinds of plants you like, whether you like shorter plants or you like plants with showier flowers. And you can also, one of the things that landscape architects will suggest is create nice borders around your native planting. And some of these groups, like the Xerces Society and other groups, actually have signs that you can purchase that talk about how your garden is habitat for native species. So hopefully you are now excited to start and to find what plants will work for your backyard. So here I've just listed some great organizations that you can go to their websites and find out more about the and start to look through plants and think of what particular types of plants would work best in your yard. Thanks for listening. Happy gardening.